Fears is something we've all come to face. Even as adults, the idea of being removed from your comfort zone and placed in a drastic or terrifying situation is something we can still grow concerned over. As children, we face these fears for the first time. They alter and shake our world and leave us frazzled. Eventually we grow out of them, but not always.
But of course, it's that time of year for horror. Cliché images of ghosts, goblins, specters, monsters, ghoulies. We know what it is. Some people love it, some hate it, but most are entirely indifferent, or are just in it for the pumpkin spice. Anyway, the point is, we all have a perception and preference for Halloween, and with Halloween comes horror. But what scares us the most? Real-life extremes, movies, or something different altogether that we've been conditioned to associate with a true essence of fear? I've done some thinking and reflecting on what horror is, what horrified me the most, why it did, how did it affect me.
So this video will be exploring that. I'll be focusing on the 3 most significant ones that caused me the greatest frights and figure out why and how it happened. It should be an interesting journey. It's the perfect time of year. So here we go with one of the more notorious holiday traditions.
Treehouse of Horror. I think the Treehouse of Horror series gets an undeserved exclusion from legitimate horror because in places it's silly and for the most part hilarious. However, the horror is amplified when you're young and don't really know what's being parodied, or most of the jokes. Despite the comedic approach, there were some generally scary moments that caught you off guard. Don't let the animation and source material fool you. There were numerous segments I could choose, but the one that sticks out the most and had the most effect on me was Bart Simpson's Dracula. You can tell from the title that's a relatively generic vampire parody. It's not the cleverest or funniest or probably even the scariest Treehouse of Horror segment, but it's definitely the one that frightened me the most. I had a vague understanding of vampires at the time, but never saw them as a source of fear until I saw childhood characters I had grown to relate to attacked and transformed into the undead creature of the night. Becoming a monster with a rampant desire for blood was a new terror placed in my head. Seeing the entire family ravaged and consumed by this nightmarish affliction was enough to keep me up at night. The ghouls, goblins, or vampires, to be specific, were well designed, and the point of view was rather frightening. The overall designs of the characters were well done, and even though I realized Burns was designed to look like that silly Coppola version, I still found it more scary than queer. I think the worst scene of all was when Bart attacked Lisa through the window. It honestly terrified me at night. I remember placing the covers over my head, but when I realized I couldn't breathe, I settled for just covering my neck. Still a difficult task for a long-necked child. What got me scared was the impending thought of becoming a vampire, a horror, a monster. It was a different kind of fear than the others. The fear of becoming something beyond yourself, more than just good or evil, but an uncontrollable monstrosity that would be all-consuming. Sure, I could imagine that a monster would come and eat me, but that'd be the end of it. With this, I would wonder what would happen if I was attacked in the night. I'd be internally stuck as a vampire, which would be entirely different than death. In fact, that was a fate worse than death. Either way, the episode was something I tried to avoid but was still drawn to anyway. I had the Simpsons guidebook lying around and would sometimes sneak at it to test my bravery, and when the episode was on I was still magnetized, hypnotized, and influenced by it. I still rewatch it now and then, but not out of a test of fear, but pure entertainment. Now that I think about it, maybe becoming a vampire with eternal youth and that free small soda wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Beyond belief, fact or fiction. After The Twilight Zone, a lot of channels tried to replicate the horror anthology formats, most notably Tales from the Crypt, Tales from the Dark Side, and maybe Night Gallery. I think those are pretty much the only ones that achieved anything beyond lukewarm recognition. However, in the late 90s, another moderately engaging and eerie show called Beyond Belief existed. It was generally low budget, cheesy, but once in a while, a sketch appeared that would leave me unsettled. Back in the 90s, content like this fascinated me. The host was very suave and mysterious, and the most notable niche to the show was determining whether the story was real or fake. This would always make me stick around to the end and would usually have an impact on me, especially if the segment was real. There were a few that stuck with me, but none as memorable as the red-eyed creature. The story is pretty straightforward. A family is being harassed by a pair of ominous red eyes presented in glorious shoestring budget effects. Anyway, it's a generic monster story. Where were the red eyes coming from? I wondered and pondered until the end. The red eyes kept appearing until they realized they might have been mistaking them for the thermostat. It wasn't until the very end when the big reveal came and it turned out to be the nanny? Her eyes glowed a bright scarlet. Well, that's stupid, you might think, but there's something far beyond it. I wasn't the most clever kid out there, but even I realized the connection. That the thought of your family member terrifying you and disrupting your life with a horrifying secret is enough to leave you shaken. Could my mother or grandmother have been the red-eyed monster? Probably not, but as a stupid kid I sure believed it. Anyway, I thought I saw the eyes in the hallway or in my room. My brother used to love shining a red flashlight that had the options to resemble the eyes, which I didn't find to be too amusing. But the real kicker to the story was that it was supposedly fact, which was a whole different set of nightmares. Not only did I have to worry about red eyes, but now it was being presented as fact. Here is something that your parents told you couldn't exist, yet now it does. It's right in front of us that this is real, that monsters exist, and that's the horror of it. Overall, most segments were either Twilight Zone ripoffs or uneventful and lackluster, but ones like the red-eyed creature provided enough fright and scares to make up for it and alter a small boy's perception. Grinch Night. Does this even exist, you may be asking yourself? Regardless, you're probably wondering how a Dr. Seuss story could possibly frighten anyone, but take a moment to think about it. The stories, while seemingly whimsical and carefree, occasionally had some elements of unsettling darkness throughout. Now, on first impression, this movie looks cheesy and family-friendly, and for the most part, it is. The thing is, I never actually saw the movie as a child, only a trailer, but that was enough to set me off. As an impressionable first grader, I think it had to do with the presentation, that of a horror movie, which at the time I couldn't place. Here's a character I knew and loved from a previous holiday special, and now here he is as a horrible monster, a demon, terrifying who's. And even though that's pretty much what he was doing in the Christmas special, there's just something different here, both intent and holiday. By some miracle, if you want to call it that, I was able to find the actual trailer. Basically, Grinch is here, it's Halloween, he's gonna have some fun. The initial darkness and eeriness sent me into a spiral of fear. I had to hide behind the wall in the next room, only hearing the sounds of horror. Nauseous and out of breath, I summoned the courage to take a look at the small television screen and immediately regretted it after what I saw. The Grinch in his most menacing appearance uttering the line,
"I'll be coming back someday."
absolute horror. I probably had to lie down. I don't remember much of the reaction after that, only a nightmare or two. That laugh and those eyes, those piercing red eyes, they stayed with me at least a few weeks, maybe months. It took me quite a while to get over it, to beat it. I don't remember who I finally asked for help because I'm sure asking my parents how to stop having nightmares about the Grinch would have landed me in the office of the nearest child psychologist. But I was told to think about something happy. Penguins, I thought. Endlessly silly, happy penguins to protect me in my sleep. Oddly enough, it worked. I still had nightmares now and then, other characters too, I'm sure, but they subsided. The fascination with horror didn't fade though. Whether it was other Halloween specials or horror movies, that innate desire to be scared never withdrew. A few years ago, I eventually faced my childhood fear when something sparked a reminder of it, and of course it was readily available on YouTube. It was a relatively fun experience. Obviously it wasn't scary, but it was definitely a nostalgic trip and brought on a wave of emotions. Not fright exactly, but a reminder of it. That line especially, I will never forget it. I think if I would have watched the actual movie and not the trailer, it would have been far less overwhelming. I definitely tried to back then, but that was quite the ordeal during the 90s, especially for a mildly lesser known title like Grinch Night. I had one opportunity to watch it when it was on Cartoon Network Theater or the like, but I chose to go to a friend's birthday party instead. I can't begin to tell you how poor of a decision that was. Anyway, the songs and cornball dialogue, as well as the anticlimactic defeat of the Grinch, who appeared more as a bumbling annoyance than a menacing figure, were all factors supporting that. I'm not sure I would have reacted to the nightmarish insanity of the paraphernalia wagon, but all in all, it had such an impact, though unintentional, and was my earliest memory of genuine fear and terror. That's something that can't be replaced or replicated at this point. I don't think anything beyond real-life horrors like losing someone or something will scare me the way it did. It was an intense experience that was probably blown out of proportion when I look back on it, but all in all, I find it fascinating, the subjectivity of horror. So there you have it, 3 significant events of fear and horror from my childhood. I could list numerous more for analysis, but by far, these were the 3 that stuck with me the most. I did research analyzing others' fears and dilemmas as kids, and it really opened my eyes to the wonders of it all. Some relatively strange, some typical. Like this King Ramses ghoul, for example. I know I've seen him as a kid, but it didn't faze me one bit. I thought he looked horribly animated, but yet I still see things like this all the time of how much he scared people. To me, I think it's interesting that it's almost like we have a need to be scared and to seek it. Our parents try to shelter us from fears, but they're so natural that they can occur in the most mundane things.
Insights aside from the childhood fears of the man behind the mask, I hope this video got you thinking about some of your childhood fears and how you dealt with them. Since there's still time before Halloween, I want to check out some of my favorite horror classics. See you next time.